What's going on, everyone? Welcome to another edition of the Quality Talks podcast. This is episode 4 of our Bitesize Series, small changes that make a big difference to quality. If you've tuned into the other 3 episodes, you'll know that we've covered various topics in this series so far. So we've talked about how we can make quality more visible, how we can add quality into our teams without slowing them down. And in the last episode, I spoke on how you can influence the system, not just the software, as a lone QA in a team. Today's episode, so in episode 4, what I'm interested in talking more around is sort of something along more of the emotional side of what we do as quality professionals and how that can impact the overall quality of the work that our teams produce, and the system and the system that we work within. So over the next couple of episodes, I'm going to be delving into this area more. And this is all around burnout. I've spoken to so many quality professionals over my time, and I've faced into this myself where things are hard. Our roles aren't easy. It can sometimes feel like we're constantly banging our heads against a brick wall, and we're trying to influence teams and influence systems that just don't want to be influenced, right? They don't want to change. That can be tough, and it can lead to burnout. And having been in that position before a few years ago where I was on the verge of burnout, and I know people that have gone over that edge and have hit that wall, it's not a great place to be. So over the next couple of episodes, I want to focus in on that area, and try and give people some insight as to, firstly, how to recognize the signs. And that's what we're going to be talking about in today's episode. And then in the next episode, we'll talk more around how can we avoid getting into that place in the first place. Now, obviously, a part of that is recognizing the signs to start with. But once you see those signs, what can you do about them? And that's what we'll cover off in the next episode. But for now, I just want to sort of talk a little bit before we get into things about why this really does matter so much. And obviously, as quality professionals, we play a big part in what our teams do from a quality perspective. Whether you're an individual in a team or whether you're a team of people, whether you're paired with somebody else in a team or whatever, it doesn't matter. We have a big influence, or we try to have a big influence and a big impact on the outcomes that our teams deliver. So if we are hit with burnout, what do you think can happen? Obviously, that will impact quality directly, and overall, it can impact not just the output and outcomes of the team, but it can also impact how the team effectively works and communicates and collaborates and all sorts of things on a deeper level. So that's why it's so important that we talk about this. And these things don't happen all of a sudden. These are things that creep up on us over time. So helping understand and recognize some of those signs of what could potentially ultimately cause you burnout in your roles is really important. Okay, so let's get into this conversation then. The first area that I'd like to talk about is burnout often starts with good intentions. Now, you might say, well, how can burnout start with good intentions? So let me talk about that a little bit more. As quality professionals, guess what? We care deeply about quality. We care deeply about the quality of the product that ends up in our customer hands. And sometimes, because we care so deeply, we can start going above and beyond, say, what might be a normal day's work, or what the sort of our normal expectations may be for the role. We start putting more expectation on ourselves. So we might start staying late to finish testing, because guess what? It's been squeezed to the end. And we feel like we still have to do, the same amount of testing that we wanted to do in the first place, even though we've got less time. We work longer hours, we put in more effort. We start thinking about, I need to run just one more check here. I'm not quite happy. If this goes out and there's a problem, are people going to blame me? So you start taking more and more on your shoulders. And also you start, if there's a situation where maybe your team isn't as mature, you start plugging the holes. You start becoming that person where you start picking up aspects of quality that maybe somebody else in the team should be taking on. We talk a lot about obviously whole team responsibility, and that is amazing when it works, but it's hard to get to that place. So it becomes almost like second nature for us to step in and pick something up that we know that somebody else might or should be doing. And initially, if you're doing this, you're doing these things sort of for short stints. That's maybe okay, but often these behaviors start to get praised, right? So teams see them more as like, you're so dedicated to what you're doing. They praise them, and then the expectation rises more. But over time, what happens is patterns start to become created. So the quality professional in the team starts becoming known as almost like, or seen as, the safety net. So coming back to that whole gatekeeper piece that we talk a lot about and trying to get away from, that's how that can manifest itself, because you care so passionately, because you're putting in all this extra effort, because you're filling these gaps. What you're also doing is you're also hiding where the system is ultimately broken. So you're putting like band-aids and sticky plasters over where the problems are, and therefore people can't see them and people aren't aware of them. And therefore the onus and the pressure to keep doing that, to allow the system to flow well, starts building up on your shoulders. So what starts off as good intentions starts becoming a real stressful and problematic state. And the thing then is that starts having an emotional and mental impact. And one of the first places you tend to notice this shift is in your curiosity. Okay. So this is a big warning sign that you're starting to step into maybe a level of burnout. If, as quality professionals, as software testers, curiosity is our superpower. Okay. It allows us to ask questions. It allows us to explore systems. It allows us to explore products. Coming at things with a level of curiosity and excitement. If you start losing that as a quality professional, then you'll start just moving into this sort of more mechanical way of doing things. You might just start just running scripts because I just need to test this thing. And I say test in inverted commas there, because are you really testing something if you're just running scripts? The jury's out. We know that. You're less likely to be asking questions such as, what happens if? What if the user does this? We talked a lot about questions and sort of big questions that you can, or better questions that you can ask in the last episode when we were talking about how you can approach that. Well, if you start becoming mentally drained and you start losing your curiosity, then you're not likely to want to be asking these questions, because you're just not as connected to what you're doing. And this is a big sign that potentially you could be moving towards a level of burnout. So it's something to really keep an eye on. Another symptom that you might see, or another signal that you might start seeing, is you may start feeling like you're responsible for everything from a quality perspective. Okay, so I talked about you start putting pressure on your shoulders. That's exactly what I mean by this. So you might start feeling like oh my God, I'm responsible for, I've got to do this testing. I've got to figure out what I need to do from a regression perspective. I need to pick up this automation. I need to sit with our product owners and do the demos. I need to do sort out the release notes. I need to make sure the release is good quality and do the. You may start picking up all that, and I've been in this position before where literally I became a delivery manager overnight, or a release manager overnight, as well as doing my test manager role. I literally was, pulling the strings on everything because I felt it was my responsibility and nobody else was really picking that up. Could they have picked it up? Yes, absolutely. But I started just doing it. So therefore people were like, well, Stu's doing it. We don't have to, right? He's doing such a great job of it. We don't have to. And that was me that was doing that to myself. Nobody asked me to do that. So you might start looking at, feeling like, oh, every defect that occurs is on your shoulders. Even when, as we all know, sort of defects can occur for many different reasons, right? Unclear requirements, design gaps, technical complexity, delivery pressure. Yeah. So all those things kind of start building up, and you'll start questioning yourself. And if you feel like you start questioning yourself and looking at things like, and asking yourself, should I have caught that? Okay, yeah, maybe I missed something here. What could I have done differently? Did I test this thoroughly enough? Then obviously that starts building an emotional overload. Okay, that again starts building more pressure on your shoulders. And as we know, right, quality is influenced by many roles. And if you're starting to feel like you're responsible, and this isn't to say that your team aren't aware that they should be doing these things, but as I said before, if you're doing them, then often people will just allow that to keep happening, especially if you're doing them really well, right? So you could almost be a danger to yourself in this situation. So it's just, again, something to think about, something to look at, something to be mindful of, when you could be moving yourself towards burnout. Okay. And obviously over time, as responsibility builds, and as I mentioned it before, it can start showing up, different levels of pressure. Okay. So another area is feeling like you're permanently firefighting. You've got so much going on that you're constantly bouncing around from one thing to another, you get that sort of, that almost like, it feels like that constant release pressure. Even if you're not releasing every day or every week, you almost feel like you're in a constant state of release because you're having to do all these different things. You might be in a situation where your testing is happening late. Releases always feel rushed, even though maybe they're not. And maybe it's not so much that the releases are actually rushed. Maybe it's because you've got too much going on, and you're not able to release some of that pressure. It might be that quality conversations are happening last minute, again, because you're having to context switch because of all these different things that you feel like you've got responsibility for. Okay. This can really start causing real sort of mental fatigue. And if you start having mental fatigue, obviously your risks of burnout continue to grow. By having mental fatigue, obviously that starts affecting your emotional energy, and it starts becoming really draining. Okay. This then starts being an issue when you're, thinking about the risk of something and how you come to raising those risks. If you're emotionally fatigued, are you really thinking as effectively as you could be? Are you really looking at the bigger picture as you could be? Do you have time to look at the bigger picture as you feel like you should do? coming back to all these other things that we've been talking about, how these things build up and build up and build up and build up. So over time, that can change. So especially when if you're in that position where you feel like you are fighting a losing battle, right? You're talking to a brick wall, you're raising these things, you're having these conversations, but nobody really seems to be listening. Okay. And sometimes you just get to the point of going, well, why am I bothering? Right. And you kind of emotionally can start shutting down. Okay. So if you start shutting down emotionally, then what you're generally starting to do there is you're shutting down parts of your brain that maybe help you with curiosity. They help you with asking questions, help you with thinking, in terms of the broader risk. You're disconnecting with, what you're doing on a day-to-day basis, why you're doing it, the importance of quality. And obviously then guess what? That level of disengagement becomes a real problem, because you stop having the types of conversations that you would normally be trying to encourage within your teams. You stop having the energy to sit with your teammates and influence them in the ways that we've spoken about in the previous episodes. So being aware of some of these signs is really important. Now, these are just some examples of things that you can keep an eye out for, and things that you can be mindful of in terms of what you're doing. There will be other signs you'll see as well. For me, things that I've seen myself happen in the past is I will almost I will end up going into refinements and just not saying anything, just not really contributing at all, because my brain is just not functioning properly. It's tired, it's fatigued, it's disconnected. It almost feels like, just what's the point? What's the point of me asking these questions? Well, we know what the point is, because we've spoken so highly about this stuff before, right? But you get to that place where you think there is no point. Nobody's really listening. I'm doing all this stuff. Nobody really cares. And you actually overlook some of the acknowledgements that people start giving you for the work you've done previously. But bearing in mind that the work you've done previously has probably led you to the point of feeling the way you feel, because, as we said before, you're plugging those gaps. You're maybe doing some of the things other team members should be doing. You're context switching all the time, and that just becomes really, really difficult. So just be mindful of these signs, and not just for yourself either. The other thing to think about here is, if you're seeing somebody doing this in your team, pull them to one side and just sort of say to them, are you okay? Are you sure you want to be doing all these different things? Because sometimes when you're in that moment, you don't even know you're doing it. It just becomes second nature. So if you're in a team and you're seeing some of these behaviors from your quality professionals, then pull them to one side, have a conversation, call it out. Don't obviously call it out in a room of people, but just take them to one side and just check that they are okay. Because there are a lot of quality professionals out there that have experienced burnout, and are probably in some of these stages right now, and maybe they don't even know it. So whilst I'm talking to you all now about how you can recognize the signs for yourself, sometimes you don't recognize those signs, but others can. So if anybody's listening to this and you're seeing these things, definitely pull that colleague to one side and put an arm around them and just check in to see if they're okay. Is there any support they need? Anything like that. and also, these sort of things go for other people in the team, not just quality professionals. But I think being in roles, a quality professional role, I think we do take a lot on, and we do feel the pressure that quality is, even though it might be a team responsibility, we still feel that we are accountable for it. And that pressure can be all consuming. And also, I've had conversations with people talking about, they have trouble, sort of sharing their workload or allowing others to be involved because of trust. Are they going to be able to do as good a job as I know I can do myself? Well, we can't expect our teams to own quality if we're not allowing ourselves to release some of those tasks and some of those things that we know that need to be done, and other people could do and pick up in their roles, or or just support us in what we're doing. So these are all things to be mindful of. Okay. So as I mentioned, in the next episode, we're going to come into how can we start preventing some of these things from happening in the first place. Now, kind of touched on some of them, and almost like you may sort of guess some of the things, but I want to just take that time in the next episode to do exactly that. So I just want to leave you all with a bit of a reflection piece. Burnout is serious. Okay, we all need to be mindful of people's mental health and well-being. It says it on my hat. Okay, so it's okay not to be okay, and I can't say that more than that is the truth. But to be aware you're going through that in the first place sometimes is the hardest part, and acknowledging that you're going through that is the hardest part, which is why we need those people around us to help us. So as I said before, burnout rarely happens all of a sudden. It's these little things that build up and build up and build up and build up and build up. So here's a question. So I've kind of asked people to think about this, but here's a question. So have you noticed, go away and think about, have you noticed any of these signals either in yourself or in someone in your team recently? So for example, are you noticing curiosity fading? Do you see somebody taking on the more responsibility than they maybe need to, or they're expected to? Are they shutting down in meetings, or sessions where you might be talking about risk, and whereas they might have previously been contributing a lot, are they still contributing in that way? Are they asking questions? Are they trying to engage in those types of conversations? These are all little things you can keep an eye on. Okay, so as I say, in the next episode, we are going to focus in on how do we actually prevent these things from happening. Because ultimately, if we're going through burnout, then that directly impacts what we do, and the quality of the outcomes that we are building, right? And if we can nip those in the bud early, then guess what? It's going to make a massive difference. So I know this is slightly a different episode from what we've done before in this series, but I think it's really, really important that we step into this space and bring awareness to these things, because the human and the people side of it, the emotional side of quality, is so important. Okay, so that's it for this episode, where we're talking about realizing the sort of the signs of burnout, noticing those signs. In the next episode, we'll jump into how we avoid them in the first place. So thank you for listening. Hope you take something away from this episode, and you're able to go and have those conversations with your teammates, sit back and reflect on yourself. Are you feeling these things? And be sure to join us next time on the next episode of Quality Talks podcast. Take care for now.